Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich, a live listener call-in show where we share the stories of everyday Orthodox people as we get to know the members of the body of Christ. Join the conversation. We invite you to call in with questions at 1-855-AF-RADIO, 1-855-237-2346.
And welcome to Everyday Orthodox. We are live on Ancient Faith Radio on September 6th, 2020. Now, we get together here every Sunday night to meet another Orthodox person. And I just love it. I think it's so much fun. You know, when you travel around, you go to different Orthodox churches, you go to the coffee hour, you sit down. If you just start asking people questions, you know, who they are, where they've been, what they do, it's amazing. Our Orthodox community is just filled with so many fascinating people, I think. You know, of course, we have a lot of immigrants who've come from faraway places, or we have people who were raised in immigrant families, and frankly, they always have really funny stories. And then, of course, we also have a lot of converts who, in a million different ways, have found their way to the Orthodox Church. So I think it's really neat. We have a very special crowd of people, and yet we're so divided up. We're split up. We worship in different jurisdictions. We live in different regions. This is such a vast continent here in North America. We're all over the place. I think it's just so wonderful to get an opportunity to meet someone from a different jurisdiction, a different part of the country. So, you know, someone you might not have met otherwise. And of course, these days with coronavirus, you know, here we are, social distancing. You can meet new people without risking a thing. So, you know, put up your feet, take off your mask, and let's get to know somebody. So tonight, we have John Maddox here in the studio. He is taking your calls. So it's kind of a bonus. You know, if you want to join the conversation, not only do you get to join the conversation and talk to our guest, but you get to say hi to John Maddox too. And he's always delightful. And of course, our chat room is open. That's ancientfaith.com/radio/live. So whether you want to call in at 1-855-AF-RADIO, 1-855-237-2346, or just join us in the chat room, you're invited to come on into the conversation. So I am very excited tonight. I don't know if you can tell, I'm pretty fired up. We have a wonderful guest for you tonight. Her name is Lisa Rigicic. And actually, Lisa and I both grew up kind of in the same area. We didn't know each other, but kind of around each other in Northern California. Our paths have crossed without us knowing it. But Lisa is really delightful, and I think you're just absolutely going to enjoy her. I already love her because Lisa is a high school English teacher and she loves it. And I absolutely get that. I think teaching high schoolers how to think and how to write sounds like just about one of the best things ever. So without any further ado, let's welcome to the program, Lisa.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show, Lisa. I'm so excited about this. I'm really delighted. So just to start out, you know, tell us a little bit about yourself. Did you grew up in Northern California?
I did. I was raised Serbian Orthodox and grew up thinking that everybody I knew in my public school had, you know, ate ethnic food of some type and went to an ethnic church. And little did I know I was sort of the outlier. There weren't that many people who went to church, first of all, but also our Serbian heritage really sort of infiltrated every aspect of my life, as did the Orthodox aspect. So I was born and raised here. And then moved to New York when I was 29 to marry. Then moved and married. You know, you live to 29, and there were maybe 4 eligible bachelors in my church. And, you know, we were like brothers and sisters, but lo and behold, I connected with someone who's 6 years older, and it took about a minute for us to fall in love. And we got married and moved back, and then started attending a Greek Orthodox church, which was a mile from our home in Marin County.
Oh, a mile away. That's fantastic.
It was great.
That's the dream. You're living the dream. That's awesome.
Really,
that is awesome. So wait, so when you say, did you two grow up in the same church, but because he was 6 years older, you didn't know him well? Is that what you're saying?
I knew him well. I was little and dorky, and he's not afraid to share that with anyone who wants to talk about how we met. You know, but I had a crush on him from the time I was 12 years old.
Okay.
And he's a humble man. So he says, "No, I think you're thinking of my brother." No, no, it wasn't your brother. It was you. So when we reconnected, when I was 29, I went back east to do a educational consulting job, and I wanted to spend the weekend in New York, but on a teacher salary, couldn't afford it. Ran into my husband's father at church, and he said, "You should call Stevie. Call him up and see if you could stay on his sofa." And I did, and I was there for 4 days. And when I left, I thought, why can't I meet somebody like that in California? He didn't flirt, nothing like that, but we became friends. And by the grace of God, he started calling, and within about 6 months, we were engaged.
Oh, that's amazing. That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and really, when you're 12 and he's 18, it makes perfect sense that you would be madly in love with him and he would be like, "Ah, whatever." But then, 29 and 35, that works. That's
Exactly.
oh, that's really neat. Now, what was he doing in New York?
He had his own business, a tech company, which it was small when I moved there when we got married, and large. He sold it eventually, right before we moved back. So he's pretty fearless, um, really entrepreneurial, and he's just wonderful. So
Wow.
and I'm not a business person, I'm a teacher. So I've always sort of marveled at how he gets an idea and then prays about it, and then puts his head down and moves forward into the unknown. uh,
Ah,
so
that's
yeah,
amazing.
really, really
So
great.
when was this? This was in like the early 2000s. He sold a tech
Yes,
company.
yes,
That's the time to be starting tech companies, isn't it? Like
yes,
he
yes,
was
it
right on
was.
target. Oh,
It
that's
was
fantastic. So when you
great.
guys were in New York, were you in New York City?
We were in New York City, and I will say this: I love God my whole life. And in high school, I was part of our public high school Christian group, and I dated people. And for all of the young people listening right now, I have to say, I prayed to know when it was right. And when I met Steve, I'm from a family who was in church every Sunday, and we were there early. Everybody had a job in church. My grandfather did the candles. My father was choir director. And my husband's family was sort of Christmas and Easter.
Mhm.
And so when I met him, I remember it felt so right. But I remember praying and saying, "God, are you sure?" Because he's not as into it. He loves that I'm into it, but he's definitely not as into it. And it was, I think, God made it very clear to me. I had such peace about him. And then when we had our first baby, my husband became the spiritual leader of our family. And it just took meeting the right priest, developing that relationship. And one day in church, he turned to me with tears running down his face and said, "I now know there's someone on the other side of my prayers." He said, "I don't want to talk about it. You're going to want to talk about it and analyze it because you're an English teacher." But from that moment on, he was the one saying, "It's it's 9:45. You're not dressed. We have to be at liturgy." So it's been a huge blessing because with two sons, we have two boys. Had he not taken on that leadership role, I don't know that my sons would have the faith that they have. So I'm
Isn't
thankful
that
in so many
beautiful?
ways.
Oh, I bet. So tell me about, like, as you say, his leadership in the house is a big deal for the boys. And also you had a family that really led you and gave you this great example in church. What was
Absolutely.
that? What's that like? I mean, I grew up in a family, my family wasn't Orthodox, literally never ever went to church until I was in my 20s. Great family, right? But I have no idea what that's
Yeah.
like. Like, what is that like to be sort of one of the central families in the church? You guys were Serbian. You're in a Serbian
Yes.
Orthodox church. So was it like, were your grandparents like founding members of this parish? Were you kind of just established from the beginning there?
I should know the answer to that. I believe my grandfather was. He came
Wow.
over from Serbia at 13 years old, and I remember him saying he wouldn't go to church until he could afford a suit because he didn't want to look poor. He wanted to show up right for God, but he was very involved, and he probably was one of the founding members. But what it was like for me, I've never had to to doubt that there was a God who loved me ever, with all the mixed up ideas we have about who God is, because our brains are too small to really ever grasp the ineffability of God. But I always knew he was good, and I always knew he was with me, and I would roll up my shade and kneel on my bed and look out at the sky and know that I was praying to him and that he heard me. So I think I love that. There was no room to question it, but maybe it's my nature. I don't question that much anyway, but just that certainty of goodness and that God had me and has me was a gift that my parents and grandparents gave us, I think.
That is beautiful. That's really beautiful. And of course, it seems like in a way, you were able to model that for your husband a bit too. Like, as you said, he eventually turns to you and says, he knows someone's at the other end of it. You knew that all along.
Absolutely.
And maybe he really liked knowing that you knew, like sometimes that in itself is reassuring. Oh, that's a beautiful story. So when you were growing up, were you doing like tamburiza and kolo dancing and all that kind of stuff?
I played the prima, and I will say a funny story, although maybe a little inappropriate. When we met Father Michael Previs, who was at our Resurrection Church before Father Nico took over a few years ago, the first time Father Michael and his family came to our house, my husband introduced, well, I knew Father Michael, but he said, "Did you know you've got a big dance coming up? Did you know my wife is the Kolo Queen?" Well, Kolo in Serbian means circle dance, but in Greek it means you're behind, what you sit on.
Yes.
And I remember watching Father Michael look at me and say, "She's what? Steve," So he never made that mistake again. It's
that is
tough.
awesome.
The things you need to know if you're going to go from Serbian to Greek, that's one of them.
Yes. And I will say my girls have also learned that the hard way because they do kolo dancing. And then we go to a Greek church and people are like, you do what? Dancing? What do you do? What are you talking about? But it's beautiful. It's really very much like Greek dancing, right? In the circle and going around. And so did you guys did you get all dressed up and perform and do all that sort of stuff?
We did not. Our parish was small and really didn't have that many kids. There were there were kids, but as far as who would attend on a Sunday, who would go to Sunday school, we had just a handful. It was definitely 20 or fewer including all ages. So we didn't perform. We did Savingdan, St. Sava's Day. We would do declamatias and some dancing then when I was very young. But nothing like the parish.
I love the declamatia. But our audience probably doesn't know what that is. What's the declamatia?
They're little poems that have to do with faith, and you learn them in our case in Serbian. I sat on my Jedo's lap, and he helped me with the pronunciation, and I still, of course, know my declamatia word for word. It's some of the only Serbian I speak other than the liturgy. But it was a big deal. It was a big deal to us. And, although there weren't that many kids, we were bonded. And the Radakovich boys are like my brothers. And which reminds me I should call them, honestly.
Well, when you do, say hello, because actually I know the Radakovich boys. See, it's such a small world. They were the bartenders at my wedding.
Oh,
like the Radakovich boys. Yeah, we paid them $100 to be bartenders at our wedding. They're awesome. They're great guys.
They really are. Beautiful family.
See, I love what a small world it is. I think especially the Serbian Orthodox world. I'm not even Serbian, but I married a Serb, so then I got to know everybody. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun. But so you're growing up. You've got your grandparents. You're doing declamatia, but your husband, he wasn't doing all that stuff. He wasn't there like Sunday school, declamatia, all that stuff. Did he speak Serbian?
No. He didn't. He understood. I understand quite a bit because so much was spoken in our home, and so does he. But to put sentences together, no, we really don't and can't.
Gotcha. Well, that works out. You're an English teacher, so clearly you got enough language that you're doing all.
I have enough language. I think our sons think they're Greek because they grew up in Greek Orthodox churches. They don't really think they're Greek, but we joke about it because we haven't exposed them to the Serbian culture as much. and in the beginning, it wasn't intentional. It's just the way that it happened. We have 100 kids in Sunday school, and that was so important to us. The experience that I had through campus life and young life and high school, where I met my friends who loved God or learned to love God through those programs, we wanted our kids to have that in church.
Yeah.
And it's tricky because Orthodox churches tend to not be within a mile of your house. They're mostly commuter churches, depending on where you live. So there's not one person from our church who attends the high school that my boys attend.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. You have to drive half an hour to take part in a youth group activity, but at least it's there. They do camp every year, and it's great.
That is great. Oh, that's wonderful. That's excellent. So you guys lived in New York for a while. Were you teaching in New York? What were you doing when you were there?
I taught, actually. I got a doctorate in English education at Columbia, and the way that we afforded that was I taught in their teacher education program there, which was such a dream. I mean, the whole thing was such a dream because I love writing, I love teaching, and I love education. And to be at a place that, most grad schools of education are general, but to have one that's specified English and to be able to teach at the same time was just dreamy. I loved every minute of it.
That I bet you did. That's so neat. That's amazing.
It was great.
So did you?
But it ended up
what?
I
it ended up bad
at the high school level. Yeah, I went back to the high school level. So
not for a while though, right? Because you were at Columbia, and then when you came back to California, you taught in the university for a while as well, right? Where did you teach? Where were you when you first came back?
USF, so University of San Francisco, which is Jesuit. It's great, but the thing I didn't think of, and this as a mom, I knew I wanted to have kids. I just didn't really think it through. If you teach in a graduate school of education, you teach at night. I mean, the student teach during the day, and the classes start at about 4:00 and go till 9 or 10 o'clock. So how can you be a mom? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It didn't work at all. So I tried it part-time. And then when Steve and I felt it was time for me to go back full-time, mainly because he was self-employed and we needed, really good benefits, health benefits, I looked at jobs and I had better benefits offered to me at the high school level. We moved back to Walnut Creek, which is where we grew up, and I took a job teaching at the high school he attended. And honestly, it was just a matter of months after that happened that he went in for his first series of brain surgeries that were probably, the first round was at UCSF and was over $1 million. And the second round was in 2017 at Stanford and was over $2 million. And we've paid nothing. So God knew exactly where I needed to be to get the health care that he would need to keep him alive. We didn't even know he would be sick. So it's just the number of times God has paved the way for exactly what we needed is, I can't even count.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you specifically went back to work to get benefits, and as soon as they kicked in, what happened? Why did he need to have surgery?
Well, the long story short, there's a birth defect called hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain. And when he was born with it, only it didn't show up till he was 17, which is very, very unusual. So when he was 17 playing football, he had headaches, and they put a shunt in his head, which is just basically bypasses the block for the brain fluid to drain, which you and I have in where our spine meets the base of our brain. His blocked, so they put a tube in there, and he lived like that with occasional surgeries. He lived like that until 2013. And the surgeries, they would replace it as needed. But in 2013, he had a complication that would take half an hour to explain. But we went to UCSF and they did a newer procedure, a bypass procedure. And it seemed to work for about a year. And then the whole system started failing, leading to more surgeries in 2017, and those involved hemorrhaging, and he is now impaired, um, which has been life changing. And all things work for the good of those who love the Lord. And although it's been life changing and difficult, it's been amazing too. And the things that we are learning every day. He's still the same guy, but he has very spotty short term memory. And then the other real big impairment is that he can't filter external stimuli. So in our home, he is 90% himself with a forgetful short term memory. But if we try to go out where there's noise and people and all of that, within 5 minutes, if it's an unfamiliar setting, it affects his ability to walk, it affects his speech. So he's more or less housebound. He can go to liturgy because it's familiar. And he can go to our favorite Mexican place because we know it like the back of our hands. So it's really a strange thing to try to explain to people, but it somehow it's okay. Changed everything. He'll never work again. He can't really do much outside of the house without me, but we have a loving family and we have amazing friends and community who just come to us now. Instead of us going out, they come to us. And he cooks like nobody's business. Really amazing. So we have lots of blessings to count, but it's atypical for sure.
Absolutely. That's so when you say short-term memory loss, like what does that effectively look like? He doesn't forget who he is or who you are, right? Because that's long-term. So is it just like little interactions? Like you'll have a conversation in the kitchen and you walk out of the kitchen and now he doesn't remember that you already had that conversation? Is it something that simple?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the brain is so just amazing, fascinating. If it's an emotional topic, he has more trouble remembering. So, if my 16-year-old gets in trouble, and there's it, right? So Steve is less likely to remember. I know. So
those kids are getting away with murder, aren't they? Oh no!
My goodness, they love their dad, and they know that I'm on it. So
yes, but I'm sure.
But he might, for example, he might say, "What am I making for dinner?" And I'll say, I have to remind him. If I give him a clue, he can get back to the memory. It's there. He just can't go to it directly and quickly like you and I can. So he may say, if he says, "What am I making for dinner?" And if I say, "Remember, you were searching the vegetable drawer," he'll say, "Oh, I'm doing that pasta, the zucchini pasta. Ah, that's right. I remember finding the zucchini under the lettuce. Okay, now we're back." And he remembers that way. But if I weren't there to remind him, he would have no clue. And the time, the day, all of that is gone. So, but he remembers who he is. He remembers the details of our life. He remembers baseball scores going back decades, crazy, and history. And, so
the human brain is really amazing. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating that the short-term memory even is there. You just have to give him the path to it, that he can't get to it. Yeah. The human brain really is a fascinating and beautiful thing. And it's wonderful that, thank God. I mean, of course, obviously we all wish that nothing would ever happen to anyone, but thank God he remembers who you are and who the kids are. I think if you have to lose one or the other, that's the one to lose probably, in terms of,
I agree.
In terms of being able to continue your relationships very well. Well, that is really amazing. So as you said, this changes all sorts of things, right? So he was an entrepreneur. He's doing all of this business stuff. And then he has these complications with the surgeries and everything changes. So in what space of time did you go from you were at home and he was working to suddenly it's flipped and now you're working and he's at home?
Well, I went back to work in 2013 and that was when he had that first round of surgeries. Okay. I went back to full-time high school teaching. But then we both worked while he recovered from those surgeries, but then he got sick again in 2017. And at that point, when, he went to the hospital, came home 46 days later, and it's never been the same.
Wow.
That's when it happened. So since 2017, I think it was April, and we just, boy, had a steep learning curve. And it's just so interesting when you're in that space and with the two kids and everything to realize that, I'm thank God smart, and you think you're in charge of your life. Well, there's nothing you can do about something like this. So learning to let go and trust God in a way I've never had to do, and to find that how faithful God is. And that, I mean, if you had in 2017, if you had asked me, will we ever be stable and happy again? I'm not sure. I would have hoped, but I would never have believed we could be as stable and happy as we are now. It just, God provides what you need.
Isn't that amazing? That really,
Yeah.
truly, that is really beautiful. And I think there really is something about that experience of finally being over your head, right? Like, okay, you're teaching, you're doing
Beautiful.
graduate school, you're traveling around, you're moving. Like, you might go through stresses, but you can handle it. You know where you're headed. Sometimes in life, we get these moments where we really don't know what the future holds and we don't have the power to fix it. And those seem to be those moments of clarity. Was that your experience? Was it that feeling of just like there was nothing you could do, so God just steps in? And how was that experience for you?
Well, so interesting. I think the clarity came when I am a worrier, like my mother before me. We are professional, or maybe I should say I was. When my worry got so big, I felt like I couldn't even function. And it made me realize I had to, I mean, I'm a prayer anyway, but it made me realize I had to pray. And then it made me realize I didn't really know how to pray. I know you interviewed Milena Odzich a few
Yes.
weeks ago, but Milena gave me Beginning to Pray, that beautiful book
Mhm.
from, and I pulled that book out again and I was reading, and it became necessary for me to start every day out just being with God and being still and realizing that it's not about my words earning me a sense of the Holy Spirit. It's me setting the time aside for him to give me what I need, which is, I don't even know half the time what I need, but God does. And it really came out of a desperation, like, how do I do this? And nothing in my bag of tricks is working. So I'm just completely raw and vulnerable, and I'm going to make time for God every day. And it started getting better after that. I had a peace, and He gives me peace, and He gives me an understanding that I don't have control, and I don't really want it. I thought I did, but I don't really want it because He does a way better job than I do with my life.
Isn't that true? We think we want control, and it's like, yeah, control is really a headache, and you don't know what you're doing,
Yeah.
and just drop it. Oh my goodness, this is
Yeah.
very beautiful. I want to hear more about this journey for you. And first, we're going to take a short break. Get about 90 seconds to stretch your legs and take a deep breath, and then we'll come back and we'll be talking more with Lisa. If you'd like to join the conversation, our audience is always welcome to call at 1-855-AF Radio. That's 1-855-237-2346, and we will be right back in just a moment.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bieletich will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF Radio.
Are you struggling in your walk with Christ? Do you want to rediscover your reason for living, the person you were created to be? Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, gives you the keys to unlock areas of your life that hold you back from fully experiencing the renewal and transformation God has in mind for you. Co-authored by a priest and a psychologist, Renewing You combines principles of spiritual growth with psychological tools to help you become your best self, fully connected with God's purpose for you. Reverend Dr. Nicholas Lowe is a priest, and Dr. Roxanne Lowe is a clinical psychologist. In their new book and in their ministry, the Lowes are a marriage of two different worlds and fields of study. Their work unites the seemingly opposing fields of faith and psychology to support the kind of inward reflection that leads to lasting outward transformation. Find out more and pre-order your copy, Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan. Do it now at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bieletich. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight talking with Lisa Rigisic, and she's a Serbian Orthodox woman from Northern California who met and married her sweetheart from church, but he was much older. As you were telling us, Lisa, when you were 12, he was 18, and you thought he was adorable, and he wasn't thinking much about 12-year-old girls, thank goodness. But then eventually the two of you got married, and you have this beautiful life, and you're teaching high school, and you've got your two boys. And he had these complications with brain surgeries, which really, it sounds like they should have been, pretty routine. They should have been pretty run-of-the-mill surgeries. And then over time, it sort of balloons into this situation now where he has short-term memory issues. And also he has difficulty dealing with unfamiliar stimuli. So that's only been for like 3 years though, right? You're just 3
Yes.
years into this experience? So
Yes. Yes.
do you feel like you've already kind of gotten your bearings and you're in a routine where you feel really peaceful? I mean, I feel like 3 years is actually pretty quick. It's pretty good.
I feel like we have gotten our bearings with the two teenage boys with all the change. That's been a little bit tricky. So sometimes I think I have my bearings and then I wonder if I'm just too busy to know that I don't. But I feel like we do at this point, and just we're learning all the time how to get around things or work within his impairments. So that part, although we have our bearings, I think we're still growing quite a bit. My probably biggest problem flaw is in an effort to make the best of everything, I sometimes over Pollyanna a situation and maybe don't ask for help, or I make things seem rosier than they are. And so I really work on that they are rosy as far as we've definitely been loved and supported. But I think being realistic is important, and not
Absolutely.
being realistic also about what Steve can do and what he can't. And there's sometimes we push him a little bit, and I don't think it's necessary. I think sort of giving in to the situation. We took him to Tahoe recently, and that's high altitude. And it's really hard because it's a pressure issue in his brain. High altitude is really really hard on him. It doesn't harm him, but he feels awful. So it's moments like that where I think, maybe we just need to not go up to the altitude anymore. It's okay. The beach is great. We could go to the ocean. So we're still learning.
Yeah.
We're still
Well,
learning.
and that makes sense. I mean, I do think a lot of those things, it just takes time and experience to get used to those things. But I find it really interesting. Like the idea of the boys. Like how was this for them? How old were they when all of a sudden you have this huge shift in the household, and how did they handle it?
They were 12 and 14, and they handled it really well. My older one developed anxiety and some depression about 2 years after. So, maybe a year and a half after. And, they Pollyanna things too. But they're really doing okay. They are so patient. When he asks the same question again and again, you know how teenagers can be. I teach teenagers. Sometimes they're wonderful. Sometimes they're very impatient. And the boys are just wonderful with my husband. and they love him. And they've adjusted, kids are resilient. They've adjusted so well, really. But I know that they've sort of lost their dad the way he was, and that's taken a toll that my older one has dealt with more than my younger. And we'll see. We talk about it a lot. We have Christian counselors um, who they can talk to. So, and our parish priest and our former parish priest who retired have been wonderfully supportive. So my hope is, like everything, we all have stories, we all have difficulties, and if you don't, you will. So how is God going to use that to, make each of us into who he intended us to be from the time he created us? So that's, the boys, this will become part of their story.
Yeah. Well, and how beautiful that they're going through this while they're still at home. I mean, they could we go out into the world, all different sorts of things can happen. As you say, like, you're going to end up, something's going to happen in your life, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
nobody comes out unscathed. Everybody goes
Right.
through something. But how lovely for your boys that when they're going through this, they have you with your deep faith and also your husband with his faith to guide them. And also this church community, as you mentioned, these priests. I was just talking to a friend about how in this world, our kids don't necessarily have a lot of access to older adults much. They have teachers and then they have their peers and they have their family. But if you have a church community, they have this huge network of all these different people from different walks of life and all of these adults who can be there and they can reach out. And I think especially in a situation like that, for them to be able to reach out to someone who isn't you and isn't their dad, because you guys are already carrying a heavy burden and they're not going to want to add to it, right? But for them to have someone else outside the house to be able to talk to is really
yes. And as a parent, for me to know that those are adults with faith is huge. I took the boys, this was a big deal. We left Steve alone with close friends checking in on him twice a day so that the boys and I could go to Project Mexico and build a house last summer. And that's a life-changing experience. It was really incredible. But my older one had just been diagnosed with celiac disease, the disease where you can't have any gluten. An 18-year-old boy who's skinny as all get out. It's 6'2" and 135 pounds. And it was so upsetting to him, because the dietary change is hard. And we found out right before Project Mexico, and he was really upset. And we have 3 people from our parish, 2 men, and then our youth director, Anna, who just spent the whole week with him talking about it. It was just beautiful to see him walk into the sunset with Tony and Mark and talk about his issues with men who have strong faith. It just was great. I mean, that's such a gift to have other Orthodox Christians in your kids' lives. There's nothing like that.
It really is. And we think about Christian community in the sense of like peer groups, like, oh, I want them to grow up with other kids who are Christians. They don't get into trouble or whatever. I mean, they're all going to get into trouble anyway,
Right.
But it is beautiful to have this community surrounding you, and especially, to have adults who can walk and talk with him and help him absorb that kind of news is tremendous. That is,
Yes.
and I love what you said about sort of struggling with this thing about being a Pollyanna. I think a lot of us are very optimistic by nature, and then when you start going through hard times, I think it's just that you want to be grateful for the blessings and you want to try to buoy your own spirits. But then, do you find yourself like, when you say like, are you telling people that things, when they say, are you okay? You say, yeah, everything's fine. When things aren't fine, is that what you mean? And how's that working?
Yes. And honestly, I'm so glad. You're great. You're a great listener. I just want to say that. This is not, I think, something my mom intended, but I received the message that certain emotions were wrong. Anger, disappointment, fear, sadness, that these are things other people aren't going to want to see. And that sometimes if you're afraid, it means you don't my mom never said this. I just want to say my mother has passed, but she would never say this. But my understanding was, if I'm feeling fearful, I don't have strong enough faith. If I'm feeling angry, I don't love people enough. If I'm feeling sad about what's happened with my husband, then I'm ungrateful for the fact that he's still with us and he's wonderful, But what I'm learning is that God made us with these emotions. He he doesn't want us to go punch someone in the face when we're angry, but we're not only allowed to feel anger, we're going to feel it. So for me, the Pollyanna thing comes in. It becomes me not allowing myself to feel afraid or exhausted or disappointed that this is the way that my husband's health is. God only knows where it'll go from here, but didn't want to allow myself to feel sad about the things that are hard. But the truth is, i'm I need to feel my feelings, and I need to take them to God and say, I'm feeling really sad, or I'm feeling overwhelmed or fearful, and process how I feel there. And that includes when I'm with my friends, especially my friends with deep faith, who say, how are you? To be able to say, well, I was feeling discouraged this morning, or I was feeling impatient and angry and put upon, and to let God minister to me through my Christian friends by being real about how life is, how messy it is, because it
That's
is. It's
It
very
is.
messy.
It really is. And, and it's interesting because, of course, it's a gift to you because when you open up and you admit that you're struggling, you receive all of this love and all of this help. But it's also a
Yeah.
blessing to them. And I think in more ways than you would think, because I used to always think about that idea that, like, well, we're all called to help each other. And if nobody ever admits they need help, then nobody can help, And so none of us can
Right.
live out what we're supposed to live out. But there was a priest once who pointed out to me, he was like, well, when you say that everything's fine and you're doing well, then it makes people who are struggling feel like there's something wrong with them because
Oh,
you've got
yeah.
this big challenge and you're like, well, if Lisa can handle that, what's wrong with me for being worn out and frustrated just because I had a bad week at work, right? So it's like, it is really important to have that authenticity in our relationships, not just being authentic with yourself and knowing what your feelings are, but, sharing that with other people. Life is an interesting journey, isn't it?
It is.
I think we start out thinking that these are such good traits, right? Oh, that's wonderful. You're so strong and you're optimistic and you're grateful. And then it's like, it turns out I'm not supposed to be that strong or that grateful or that optimistic.
Oh,
It sounded so
I've
good at first.
and I've actually had friends say, "Well, I feel upset about something," and then I think, "Well, look at you. You're so positive," and that that's not the way to do it. It's just
Yep.
not. It's not true all the time. It sure isn't true. We do have joy in my household, thank God, but it's not because I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a gift. It's a gift from God. God is with us. And yeah, so I hear you. It's better to be vulnerable, better for all of us.
It is. It's interesting and it's funny how often it's hard for us to be vulnerable when the truth is that that's such a helpful thing. It's so good for
Yeah.
us. But yeah, I think that is a fine line, isn't it? My guess is that a lot of people who know you probably talk about you as like, oh, this is very inspiring. My friend Lisa, she's going through all of this difficulty and she does it with a smile on her face. And that, how does that feel? Like, is that strange for you? Are you getting used to it? How is that?
Um, Honestly, the prayer thing comes back to me now. I'm really starting to feel like it I I have peace in my soul when I feel like I'm stopping and checking in with God before I speak. And if somebody sees something helpful or inspiring in my family's story, that is God's work. And this is going to sound weird, but it's almost none of my business. If I could just get out of my own way, just set my ego aside and try to set my worries aside and really just try to be who he wants me to be and let Take, for example, this interview. There was a time when I would have had bullet points and I would have written down some Bible verses. I would have been all ready and prepared. And I just instead said, okay, God, has nothing to do with me, and have your way, whatever you need. So I'm happy if our story is helping some people. But that's God's doing, definitely.
Isn't that lovely?
We're just trying to muster our way through.
Right. But I think that's so important to maintaining peace, is to say, you know, I'm open to God working through me. I'm not worried about trying to take care of everybody or inspire everybody or manage their reaction to my situation, right? Like, you just hand that all over and it takes it all off your back, and then you don't think about it and you don't worry about it. I think that's so important. I think about it even with education. I know you're a teacher. I recently was talking to someone about Sunday school, and they were like, well, how do you know, what metric do you use to measure whether faith education is successful in teenagers? And I was like, I don't know if that's any of my business. Like,
wow.
maybe we don't need a metric. Maybe we just let God plant those seeds, right? Like, so you teach Sunday school as well, right? Are you still a Sunday school director, or did you have to slow that down when
I had to slow
haywire?
it down? I kept up for the first year after Steve became sick in 2017, and then I stepped down altogether, and recently took a break from teaching the high school group as well, just because my own family seemed to need more. So we'll see where God leads. But to your point, the metric is such an interesting question. I ask that as a parent all the time. What am I supposed to do when, you, as a mom, you get that feeling that, oh, there's something I'm hearing or seeing that needs correcting, and I'm going to go lecture my son. I'm going to plan the lecture to have an impact, and really loving them and reassuring them that God is there, and that that they, together with Jesus Christ, will know the right things to do, will know when they've taken a step in the wrong direction. He will be waiting to help you through that. They're going to know. All they have to do is continually turn to him, so with religious education and parenting, what is that beautiful book, Parenting Toward the Kingdom?
Yes.
I feel like when I pray about my kids, what I get back is, how are you loving them? That doesn't mean flattering them when they're needing to be corrected, but just reassuring them that they are loved, that they're created good, and that the Holy Spirit's going to, like the scarecrow in Wizard of Oz, he's going to point this way or he's going to point that way, and you're going to have an opportunity to hear him. So
I love that.
I look forward to getting involved with the youth again. Honestly, Project Mexico last year was so great. I'm not a particularly physically strong person. I'm skinny and I can't lift much. So I was the one when the teenagers would cry because it was 100 degrees and they're mixing cement, or somebody needed water, or I was making the jokes and connecting with everybody. And I love that. I love loving people, and I loved doing that for our youth community. So I hope that that's something I get to do in the future again.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, and as your boys get older and the demands are a little lighter and they move on, I'm sure you will. I'm sure. And I want to say to our audience, we've been talking a little bit about Project Mexico. If you're interested in that, if you're not sure what we're talking about, there's St. Innocent Orphanage, is an Orthodox orphanage down in Mexico. And Orthodox people, you can come, you can get a group together and come and help build houses for people in the community. Do you stay at the orphanage? Is that how it works? You get to know the kids there? How does that work?
You do. You stay on the grounds. Actually, you pitch a tent on the grounds. And I am not a camper. I'm 53. There was no part of this that sounded like me, and it was absolutely fantastic. So much fun just just so wonderful. There's running water and all of that, but you are there on the grounds, and there's liturgy every day. And Father Nicholas Andrew Chow and Press Mary Lynn, they're just amazing. It was incredible. Every bit of it, just bonds that will last forever. I had an inflatable bed that was the size of a normal twin bed. And so my tent mates, because the women stay together, referred to me as the queen when I would come in, because they were sleeping on the floor. And I mean, it was great. But we bonded in ways that we're bonded for life now. I talk with our youth director once a week, and we pray together. We do one of the akathis. It's just great. It's really wonderful. If you can do it, do it.
That's amazing. Well, I put on our Facebook page, anyone who's looking for it, it's projectmexico.org. And I also put a link to the book you mentioned, Parenting Toward the Kingdom. That's Dr. Mamalakis's book. And that is good. That's a great, I think it's really the only real modern, like Orthodox parenting book out there. And it's just fantastic. Like, we might never need another one, that's all we needed. But so as you're going here, and you've been, you've taught teenagers, you're raising teenagers, and we're talking a little bit about that. I'm curious, do you think in some way that it's actually beneficial for the boys to have gone through this experience with you, as opposed to not going through it? Like, I think so often we protect our kids from difficulty. And I have often thought, I've had a few kids who were very sick and one who passed away. And at those times I was like, these siblings, like, your first thought is, oh no, they'll be traumatized. But then it's also like, oh, they're going to learn something too. Like, do you see a difference in your boys?
I definitely do. I definitely do. There's, I don't know if I can even name it, but it's humbling for them. And also, I think, strengthening, because they're still standing, and our family's still standing. And it was so horrific when it happened. And I think that they know both that bad things or difficult things can happen, and you can survive them. So I do think they're better for it. Also, to see their dad. He's in pain a lot of the time. He's uncomfortable a lot of the time. He never complains. And that's not true. Occasionally he'll acknowledge it, but he keeps going for the benefit of everybody. He keeps going. He's so strong. He's so positive. He's so encouraging. I think that's a real blessing for them to see him. I mean, I said at the beginning, when he had his business in New York, and then he came here and started this big wine event that ended up being in 4 cities, and he's just amazing. But I think now, with the impairment, he's more dependent on me. The way he does every day is more remarkable and more courageous and more manly than anything he did before he got sick. I just think, and the boys see that every day. So yeah, it is a blessing.
What a beautiful example for them. How beautiful. And it is funny, right? We're this generation, I feel like we always want to wrap our kids in bubble wrap and make sure that nobody struggles. But it's like, there's so much for kids to get from that. There's so much for them to learn and to access. So overall, would you say, I mean, your life has obviously just changed so much over the last 3 years, or from where you were 5 years ago, or what would you say is the change? Like, what is the change that you see in you? Obviously, your circumstances are different, but how have you changed through these experiences?
It may not sound like a direct result, but really the biggest change in me is spiritual. And it's recognizing that my closeness with God never had anything to do with how I did my life or how hard I tried. It has more to do with believing what he says about himself, that he's here, that he's with me, that he loves me no matter what, that he created me for a purpose. And just, I don't wish there were, had better words to say this, but that letting that sink in, it's had to sink in because there's so much that is not within my control. So it's a spiritual understanding. It's just, I guess, a little bit of maturing. I have a long way to go, but a maturing. I have less of a need to try to appear to be any particular thing that the world values, and more sort of just peace that he's going to tell me the next thing I need to do. I was really struck recently by reading we all know the loaves and the fishes, but when I can't remember which moment of loaves and fishes, when the disciples want to send people away and Jesus says, you give them something to eat. And there's a way that it was worded in our Bible, that something like, we only have 5 little fish. Like, hello. And he says, I know, pass them out. I mean, he doesn't say it like that, but that's what he says. Go ahead, just distribute what you have. In other words, when he puts work in front of us, it's not our job to equip ourselves. He's going to do it. So when what you have in front of you seems to be, what I have in front of me seems to be too much, if he really wants me to do it, he's going to make it happen. And then the glory goes to him, and not my preparation or my hard work, Right. So I just have more peace. And when I don't, I know I just need to get on my knees.
That is beautiful. And thank God, because I mean, truly, peace is what we all need, right? But sometimes we have to be pushed to such an extreme to really understand how much we need it, and to really start to just reach for it and grab for it and open ourselves up to it all the time. It's a shame to think, isn't it, of all those years before where you didn't even realize you needed that peace. It's like all these years you've missed out on, and then things get complicated, and suddenly you know that that's what you need. That really is, I think, very beautiful. And I think, too, that, sometimes we get very anxious about how we're going to do something, how we're going to accomplish something. And if we could just not do that and just trust that God's going to accomplish it, or that perhaps that's not what was supposed to be accomplished, or whatever, then we're okay. Then we go through it just fine. Well, that is really beautiful. And I really appreciate you coming on the program with us tonight, Lisa. This has just been absolutely a delight.
Oh, it's a delight for me. So wonderful. And I appreciate you inviting me to share our story. I'm now going to be tuning in every Sunday to hear I've never heard anybody on this show for you. Yeah.
Oh, it's fun. Yeah.
Yes.
We get all kinds of different people. And actually, I want to say to our audience that the way that we find guests generally is that people just email me, and they just let me know. They go onto the Ancient Faith site, to Everyday Orthodox, and there's a little contact us button, and they'll just send me suggestions. And how I found you is because Milena Adzich said, you know who you should talk to next? My friend Lisa. And I was like, tell me about Lisa. It's a beautiful thing. So, I want to ask our listeners, and also you, when you think of people who are just really interesting Orthodox people, let me know. But Lisa, it's been absolutely a delight. I loved having you on. And to our audience, join us every Sunday night. We'll be back again next Sunday talking to another wonderful Everyday Orthodox person. So thank you guys so much, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. What a great conversation. Up next, we have the very renowned